Hi, I'm Heva, your host, and tonight, this evening, we are going to talk about the Middle East conflict, this humanitarian disaster between Israel and Palestine. And it is my pleasure now to introduce to you the members of our panel for this conversation or for this debate, if you will. Professor Gelvin, Mr. David Tal, and Mr. Salam al-Marayati. I hope I pronounced your name. Just correct me otherwise. So our first guest this evening, is Salam al-Marayati. He is an expert on Islam and the West and Muslim reform movements. Salam al-Marayati has spoken at the White House, Capitol Hill, and represented the U.S. at international conferences. Salam al-Marayati, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
Our second speaker would be Rabbi Aryeh Cohen, but he was not feeling well this morning. He mailed me and our best wishes. Hope he recovered soon. Speaker, UCLA Professor James Gelvin. It's an honor to have you here. It's a pleasure to have you here. Gelvin is a scholar of Middle Eastern studies. He received his PhD from Harvard University and has authored numerous academic papers and books as well. Professor Gelvin, welcome to our panel. And finally, our fourth member, or third today, member of our panel is Mr. David Tal. David was born in U.S., right? Okay. And grew up in Israel. He joined the Israel's Defense Force, and after a short period in the Air Force, David began his career in the Armored Corps. He rose to become a tank company commander and saw action during the first Lebanese war. Is that right? Yeah. After leaving the military, he was recruited by Israel's security agency, trained and sent to serve in Israeli embassies in Cyprus and Paris. He's also a book illustrator and a tour guide. Welcome to our panel.
Thank you.
To contextualize our conflict today, let's start with Professor Gelvin. Your remarks, please. Your brief introduction.
Okay. Thank you, first of all, for having me here. Over the last week, it's become fairly obvious that Hamas has gotten the war that it wants and has won the war that it wanted. And Israel has gotten the war that it wants and has won the war that it has gotten. Hamas basically launched the operation on October 7th for a variety of reasons, the most important of which was probably to put the Palestine issue back on the international burner. And they very much succeeded in doing that. They also want to be able to catch a step on the Palestinian Authority, on Fatah, and they were able to do that as well. What Israel wanted to do was to reframe the conflict in terms of a conflict not between Israel and Palestinians, but between Israel and Iran. And they've been able to take apart much of the axis of resistance that Iran has. They've been able to degrade Hamas, they've been able to degrade Hezbollah, they've been able to, with American assistance, degrade the Houthis in Yemen, and of course, as a result of their degrading of Hezbollah in particular, the Syrians have been able to get rid of the Assad family. So both of them, both Hamas and Israel, have gotten the sort of wars that they wanted.
Thank you. Thank you so much. David, your remarks?
Well, I believe that the 7th of October was a watershed moment for Israel. There's the Israel before the 7th of October and there's the Israel after the 7th of October. It would probably be compatible to 1973, the October War, but I definitely feel a big difference between how Israel sees itself before this war and after this event, on all the different levels. I come with actual experience on the ground, on the border with Gaza, in Gaza. I know how this played out, and Israel was deeply surprised and is deeply worried that we were so deeply surprised. I blame our government for not preparing correctly for this event. And the Israeli people today are in a point where they're saying, okay, what is the next step? And like we just now heard here, we woke up to a feeling of a ring of fire around us, and probably 6 months ago I would have said we were burning up in that. Today I think the ring of fire has been, I don't know if doused, but basically much less hot than it used to be. And that, though, has created an instability, a big instability in the Middle East. And I think that's going to be the interesting thing that we're going to see playing out right now.
Thank you, David, so much. Salam?
Yeah, I'm going to speak about this issue not as anybody from the Middle East per se, but as an American. And I think as an American, I'm very concerned about my government's actions for the last year, over a year, that it continues to send military supplies in violation of American law. There is the Arms Control Act, Export Control Act. There's the Leahy Law. There's numerous laws that says that we cannot send weapons to any country that ends up using it on civilian population, civilian infrastructure, and with the destruction in Gaza, and as a response to the horrible events of October 7th, which should be condemned, and we condemned. The response has been atrocious, and the United States should have continued to be what it claims to be, and that's the honest broker. I think that idea of being an honest broker is gone. That idea of defending international law is gone. I think the United States' credibility has dwindled, if not has been erased, in the eyes of many people of the world. And if there's one group that prevented a ceasefire, it was the United States government. It wasn't Hamas or Netanyahu or parties there per se. Every ceasefire resolution that was brought up in the United Nations was vetoed by the United States, except maybe, I'm not sure about one or two, but in general they would veto ceasefire resolutions. And also they vetoed resolutions for Palestinian statehood. And so what do we mean then by a two-state solution? If we're all working for a two-state solution to see Israel and Palestine coexist, what does that mean? There's no vision here on the American side for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. And that, I think, endangers everybody, endangers Americans. And there's always concern about terrorism. I think even the whole counterterrorism policy has become a folly. It's only used when we want to do something in a particular country or a particular part of the region. But then we turn a blind eye to it when we don't want things to materialize, or we want actually to ignore it if we want something to materialize. So it's being played, and therefore the United States as a superpower has lost a lot in terms of status in the international community. And I think that's a threat to democracy. The threat to democracy comes from America itself, not from any external power. There's no existential threat to democracy out there. It's here that we have to be concerned. And as a result, China and Russia gain from it. And so if we're concerned about maintaining that superpower status, which I believe we should, because I still believe in our American principles of freedom and human rights and human dignity and democracy, then we should all be concerned and demand more from our government.
Thank you all for your remarks. We shall address all these questions and these points today, this evening. Just to remind all, including the members of our panel and the audience, that today the main question we are framing is U.S. policy in the Middle East regarding Israel and Palestine. Let me have just some ground rules for our conversation. I'll be asking you 19 questions. Hopefully we will keep our discussion under 1 hour and 30 minutes.
Amen.
And amen. And
Good thing we don't have a preacher up here.
And Rabbi Cohen, he was not able to attend our event today, our show. So I have some questions addressed to him, and I'll just ask members of our panel if you would like to answer those questions as well. So let's start with Professor Gelvin. Question number 1, and I'll number them, 19. There has been a consistent failure on all sides to understand the legitimacy of the other's narrative. Is the Israel-Palestine conflict a religious conflict or a conflict over land and resource, first off?
Well, it's certainly not a religious conflict. It's a conflict between two nationalisms. Zionism on the one hand, and Jewish nationalism, and Palestinian nationalism on the other hand. And both sides claim the right to control, to rule over part or the entirety of the territory that after World War I was called Palestine. So that is what the conflict is actually all about. Now, it's not a conflict of memorial, as the term has been used. It's a conflict that could be traced all the way back only as far as the 19th century, the late 19th century, when the Jewish religion was redefined by Zionists as a Jewish nationality. Okay. And that's when immigration into Palestine began. That's when there was resistance to that immigration. First unorganized resistance, and then as Palestinian nationalism took root, organized resistance as well. So that's what the conflict is all about. Again, it's not a religious conflict. It's not a conflict between Jews and Muslims. It's a conflict over two national communities.
Great. Question number 2, Salam. Salam. Okay. Since last century, Zionists, members of the Israel's nationalist movement, organized Jewish immigration. They began buying land on what Palestinians call the Palestine land, even though the land has been colonized on and off by Jewish communities over 2 millennia. Palestinians claim that this was a huge step into turning Palestine into a Jewish homeland. Salam, why did the Palestinians, just once again for context, reject the two-state solution? What do Palestinians, do you think, they want as a solution?
Well, first of all, I wish we had a Palestinian here on the panel to answer that question. I don't think that I'm the one to answer such questions, but as a third party, if you will, just as a student of Professor Gelvin, and other historians, I don't think there's ever been any indigenous population that supported partition of their own land. It just doesn't happen. So that's number 1. And number 2, this narrative. I understand the Zionist narrative, and people have the right to have a Zionist narrative, but there's never been the Palestinian narrative understood here in America. That Palestinians have existed there, that there was something called Palestine. Everybody referred to it as Palestine. When you looked at the map at that time, 100 years ago, even before, it said Palestine. It was the partition of Palestine. It was the Balfour Declaration on Palestine. So there was Palestine, and the United States government to this day denies the existence of something called Palestine and denies Palestinian people and their national identity and their rights. And then the other point I want to make here is that even under the caliphates, which were flawed and corrupt, and we all know the problems of the caliphates, they always had a point of preserving the Jewish populations there. The Ottomans were known of if they favored any community, they favored the Jewish community. And so many Jews who fled the Inquisition after 1492 came to the Ottoman territories, went to North Africa, were always part of Jerusalem. It was actually the Crusaders that wiped out the Jews, along with others, in that bloody battle, in that bloody onslaught and atrocities there. The Muslims always maintain, because it's in our book, in the Quran, that you have to preserve Jewish sites. You have to preserve Christian sites. Jews and Christians are referred to as people of the book. They have been given divine revelation. And so from the time of Caliph Omar to all the caliphs after that, there was an understanding that Jerusalem would be respected and for all three faiths. And even among the Christians, there were different denominations. So you have an Armenian quarter and an East, and then another part for Christians, and then there's a Jewish quarter and a Muslim quarter. So the Islamic narrative is that there was always a Jewish population in Palestine, and some of them were referred to as Palestinian Jews. And you find pictures of Jews worshiping there before 1948, before 1917. So there's, this idea that they were kicked out by Muslims or they were oppressed by Muslims. Were there some violations? Probably. I don't know. Again, I'm not a historian, but the general rule and the general policy and the general understanding in Islam is that we are supposed, by our God-given responsibility, is to protect the people of the book, Jews and Christians, including those who have been existing in Palestine and throughout the Muslim world, for that matter.
I think you touched an important point before going to David.
Yeah.
For our American audience, who are the Palestinians exactly? So you were born in Baghdad, just briefly, you were born in Baghdad, Middle East, Iraq?
Iraq,
Yeah. So is that Middle East? But you're not a Palestinian. So just for context, to clarify to our audience, let's say somebody from the audience that mixes everybody, so you're not a Palestinian. So who are the Palestinians? Arabs?
Palestinians, yeah, the generations of Palestinians,
Arabs from the Middle
they
East.
speak Arabic. Arabic which simply means you're an Arabic-speaking country.
Okay.
So an Arab from Libya, for example, could be different from an Arab from Saudi Arabia,
Right.
from the Gulf, and an Arab from the Sham, or Syria, for example. They speak different dialects, but they have a standardized Arabic language that was actually codified by the Quran.
Oh.
In terms of standard Arabic. Yes. And so there's a connection in terms, especially to the land and to the culture and Islam, like Christianity and Judaism, came from that region. Yet we say Judeo-Christian as if Islam was never a part of this Abrahamic family. And as we know, Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac, and so Muhammad came through the line of Ishmael, and Moses and Jesus through the line of Isaac. And so we're all part of the Abrahamic family. And so if we want to talk about coexistence, there has to be this understanding, and as Professor Gelvin said, it's not religious. It's not a religious conflict. There's no conflict when you understand the religion.
Right.
But if you want to understand the political history of the Zionist movement and the Palestinian national movement and what happened in terms of the establishment of military dictatorships throughout the Middle East and the monarchies of the Middle East, that's something completely different.
No, I was just trying to clarify. So you were born in the U.S., you were American, you were born in Baghdad, you Arab, you Iraqi?
American Muslim. But
but if you're born
Iraqi
over there,
roots.
you call yourself a Middle Easterner, basically, in general.
I actually don't.
You don't?
I'm an American Muslim.
Yeah, but those who were born in Baghdad, they are Middle Easterners. Okay.
Yes,
Just-
that's the Middle East.
That's
My roots are from there, but my family fled there in '63, so I was too little to make a decision on that issue. And so I pretty much grew up here. I actually grew up in Tempe, Arizona. I'm a Green Bay Packer fan, and I know that to the chagrin of many other, Los Angeles Rams fans and other fans. So I consider myself an American of the Islamic faith.
Okay, great.
I could just say just one thing. It's basically the whole term, the whole idea of a Middle East is a term that imperialists use and puts on the region. I mean, it's really Southwest Asia, to begin with. But the idea was that first the British and then the Americans created this notion of this place called the Middle East, which changes over time. I mean, sometimes it includes the Sudan, sometimes it doesn't include the Sudan, sometimes it includes North Africa, sometimes it doesn't. So it's a geographic term that's been imposed on this region that we're talking about today.
Yes, this is an anthropological issue, and I have a question to address that.
So just to also point that when you say Middle East, the Far East is far from what? It's far from Britain.
Exactly.
So the Far East was that where Britain was the center, And then the Middle East is in between Britain and the Far East.
Thank you. Good,
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, and I have also a question about that. David, May 15, 1948, Nakba Day. The British mandate came to an end and UN voted for the creation of a Palestine state and a Jewish state. The Arabs rejected peace and tried to carry out a genocide against the Jews. Is this a fair account of the facts?
Well, the UN resolution actually says two-state solution. That's what they said. And that's what the idea was. And basically, historical fact says that the Jewish entity living in Palestine, as it was called at the time, accepted a two-state solution. And the local population, we'll call them the Palestinians for lack of a better term, and the rest of the Arab world decided not to accept the two-state solution. And there was violence between the Jews and the Arabs inside the area, and there was an attack by Arab armies from outside. As far as I know, and the established scholars here could probably agree with me on that one, that is historical fact. To call it the Nakba would be to call it the tragedy. That's already moving into terminology. I would not call it the tragedy, I would call it a miracle. And I would call it a miracle of the reestablishment of an indigenous people in its indigenous homeland. That's the way I would see it. So that would be the way to designate what happened in 1948.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Rabbi Cohen. I'm just going to throw in here, and if anybody wants to take on this question, please. It has been argued that the human cost of this war is counterproductive to Israel. This is actually for him because he is a commissioner, but how should the Prime Minister of Israel have responded to October 7 massacre? Did the Prime Minister do the right thing?
I mean, it's pretty clear that decimating a whole population, bombing hospitals and schools and mosques and churches is not the right thing. You know, if there's a hostage situation in our bank here down the street in Santa Monica, we don't bomb the bank, right? We have a special operation to free the hostages and to arrest the criminal. So it's definitely not the right thing. And again, I think the whole world sees and views this as a decimation. They're basically making Gaza unlivable, so that people either die there from disease or from starvation or from being killed. And then people are stuck there. It's like a cage. So, whatever he did is not right. I also disagree that in 1948, of course, that's the Zionist narrative. The other narrative, the Palestinian narrative, is that it wasn't. Of course, it was a catastrophe. The Palestinians had no means to defend themselves. There were massacres at the time. It was an ethnic cleansing. In fact, in Gaza, we find that you have generations that have lived in Gaza for quite some time, and then refugees from 1948 were moved to Gaza at that time. So that was the Nakba, and it's called the catastrophe for the Palestinian people. And the Zionist movement definitely had Western support. I think Russia was the Soviet Union was the first country to recognize Israel, followed by the United States. And you have videos of Harry Truman saying, well, the Jews wanted all of it, and I had to tell them, no, we couldn't send out 6 million Arabs out. You can't do that, so we're trying to figure out a solution. So it was always that dilemma of how do you bring in these immigrants, these refugees from Europe, and then displace Palestinians as a result. And the Zionists were definitely supported militarily by Western powers and financially by Western powers. And so the Palestinians had no chance. There was just no chance at that time to defend themselves and to defend their homes, even though some of them still believe they still have keys to those homes that they were kicked out of. And some of them stayed in what is now called Israel. But in terms of it being a Nakba, of course it was the catastrophe.
Okay.
I think this goes
Yes,
back
please.
to the thing I was saying about nationalism. All nationalisms create narratives. Their own history, the history of the nationalism itself, and the history of the people that are part of that nation. So here what we have is two different narratives that have emerged about what happened in 1948. One of which was, the most glorious moment in Jewish history for the Zionist narrative, and the other of which was Nakba, when 720 Palestinians were forced to leave. 720,000 Palestinians, were forced to leave their homes and go, either into the Arab world or into Europe or North America or wherever they could find whatever they could do. So, basically these are the sort of narratives that we can expect to see. Now, the Israeli narrative now for this particular war is that fundamentally the war that they're waging is a war that was inflicted upon them, that they have to wage, and that, fundamentally it's a war for Israel's existence because of what happened on October 7th. The other part of the narrative is that the Palestinians have demonstrated that they shouldn't be rewarded for what happened on October 7th by getting a state in a two-state solution. Okay? The Palestinian narrative, of course, is a narrative that looks precisely at the damage that was done to the Palestinian population in the territories. So, and it's not just Gaza; it's also the West Bank. So, each side has a narrative of its own and emphasizes points which put it in a better light.
I have to agree that there are two narratives. I have to agree that the two narratives are based in two different point of views. I don't agree that there's not a religious aspect. I think there are multiple aspects that create these narratives. One of them is nationalism. I agree with that, the Zionist movement. But there is also a religious element. And I have to agree that we are locked in some kind of struggle that I think both sides don't really want to be in. But as opposed to the esteemed colleagues right here, I have been on the ground. And I have to say that besides the academic discussion about the narrative, and besides the religious narrative that is going on, the people on the ground have very specific narratives, and we are living by how it seems and how it looks to the people on the ground. Most of the Muslims that I've ever talked to inside both Israel, the Arab Muslims, inside the Palestinian territories, inside Syria when I met Syrian Muslims, inside Lebanon when I met Lebanese Muslims, most of them define it as a religious issue. And when they go to war, their battle cry is Allahu Akbar. It is a war in their minds, in the minds of most of them, and many of them, a religious war that they are actually part of. And we saw the soldiers of Giuliani yesterday saying, we've now conquered Damascus, and we are on our way to Al-Quds and later on to Mecca and Medina. I think that there is a religious narrative that is being used to galvanize at least parts of it. There is another side, there's a religious narrative on the other side. Because if you ask an Israeli, me included, I would say, I am part of the Jewish nation. This is my indigenous homeland. This is a historical continuation of everything that being Jewish actually represents, both the religion and the nationality. I think it's more complex than just one element here, one element there. But I want to stress the fact that at the end of everything, after we finish the whole, we're living on the ground. And my question maybe, and what I'm trying to ask here, is for us living on the ground, what do we do now? How do we mesh this situation right now? And this is something that I've been doing for many, many years. I was part of an organization called Seeds of Peace probably 10 years ago who was trying to do that. And I'm sad to say that we have failed miserably. And maybe this is what we need to do here.
Right.
The official narrative of what Israel's war aims are is to, number one, destroy Hamas, which it's not going to be able to do, and release the hostages. But there's a third reason why Israel's at war right now: to release the hostages, to destroy Hamas, and to keep Benjamin Netanyahu out of jail. And the way they're waging the war is a way of continuing the war as long as they possibly can, inflicting the much damage that they possibly can, keeping Netanyahu out of jail. And so it was that is not a war of choice, but it's a tactic of choice.
And then there's no military solution. You can bomb areas as much as you want. There'll be other groups that will rise from the ashes. I mean, Hezbollah rose from the ashes of the 1982 invasion of Lebanon. And the more you suppress groups, the more extreme other groups will come in its place.
Gotcha.
So there's no military solution. It has to be, and appreciating the religious complexities that David mentioned, at the end of the day, it needs a political solution.
Question number 5. Professor Gelvin, could you elaborate on the so-called Palestinian Revolution of 1936 that left Palestinians with no political leadership? What type of government is Palestine under? Does the U.S. recognize Palestine?
Well, first off, this is a very, very large question. The British got control over Palestine, the Palestine Mandate, from the League of Nations at the end of World War I. And there was a rebellion of Palestinians that took place in the 1930s, the Great Revolt, as it's called among Palestinians, that was an attempt to actually get rid of both the Zionists and to get rid of the British. The revolt failed. It was put down, when we think of the British Empire, we think about the spread of liberalism and this, that, and the other thing. It was a violent empire. It was an extraordinarily vicious empire. And it put down the Palestinian rebellion with a great deal of viciousness. There was a very high casualty rate. 1 in 10 Palestinians were interned, for example. And at the end of the day, by the time the revolt was put down in 1939, the Palestinian leadership had fled, both from the exactions of the rebels and from the British themselves and the Zionists. That there was a leadership vacuum in Palestine. And this was a direct contributing cause of the collapse of Palestinian resistance in 1948. That Palestinian society never recovered from the Great Revolt of 1936 to 39.
And also, thank you for that. And also, first state solution, 2-state solution. Let's move on to a third option. Professor Gelvin, according to political philosopher and linguist Noam Chomsky, the third option is to let the conflict to continue on as is, with Israel eventually taking control of the land. Your thoughts?
I think that there are elements within Israel that very much want to do that. There are elements that want to take control of Gaza, of all places, that the Israelis withdrew from in 2005. The West Bank is certainly on the agenda. When Benjamin Netanyahu, for example, spoke before the United Nations in September of last year, he showed a map of Palestine, he showed a map of Israel that didn't include Palestine in it. There are 3 solutions out there, okay? One of which is a greater Israel, which is going to really isolate Israel in the eyes of the world. Even more than it already is. There's a 2-state solution, and the fairest that I think of solutions is a 1-state solution, in which not one side or the other dominates the other side, but that basically you have 2 people living together within a single political unit. Now that's never going to happen. They can't even agree on things like water rights. How are they going to agree on things like basic law? So fundamentally, the way we have to go is towards a 2-state solution. That's the way it has to be. That's what the Oslo process was all about. Now, the problem is that the Oslo process, first, the Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon, walked away from Oslo. And then the Palestinians themselves, by seeking recognition in the United Nations, also walked away from Oslo as well. So at this point, there is no process going on. The last round of discussions between Israelis and Palestinians, according to the Oslo formula, was in 2015, ended in 2015. And there's been nothing going on since that time.
All right, and this is a question, or it was a question for Rabbi Cohen, if anyone wants to take down. And going back to the terms and terminology, words and terms such as Middle East and Israeli-Palestinian conflict is to a certain extent the language of the dominant group. We all agree on that. What are the main issues facing Palestinians and marginalized peoples today? Anyone?
I mean, for Palestinians, this mere existence and dealing with the decimation and annihilation of their homes, and in the West Bank, the expansion of Israeli settlements, and now far-right members of the Israeli government basically sanctioning and supporting and making it official that these expansionists there will be no accountability. The United States has tried to sanction some of these groups. I think individuals have been sanctioned by the United States government, but that's just a drop in the ocean in terms of the problem. So from a Palestinian standpoint, I think the issue right now is the existential threat of in other words, their existence is being wiped off the map, and so the issue is about having a state, having a national home, having a place they can call Palestine. And right now, that is being pushed off, namely by the United States, which is complicit because we have financed, we have protected, we have provided military equipment for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and genocide of Palestinian existence in the region. So we are culpable as the United States of America.
I'm fascinated that as you were framing that, I would sit here and I would say, from an Israeli point of view, it's the same thing. The terminology is the same. You ask an Israeli, it's an existential threat. You ask, we saw the 7th of October as an existential threat, and the ring of fire around us as an existential threat. And maybe religion doesn't connect, but nationality does. And like you said, a people has a historical memory. Don't forget we're Jews. We have a historical memory about people who want to destroy us. So there is an existential threat in our mind. And like he just now said, the far right extremists that we have want to go even further, but we see the far militant extremists on that side that say we don't want a two-state solution, we want the destruction of the state of Israel, and we want Israel to be completely annihilated. So we see that, and we say we have to defend ourselves against this. The only difference between my narrative and a Palestinian narrative is, as of now, I am stronger. And that's part of the dynamic. As of now, I have the ability, or a better ability or capability, to defend my mother who lives in Israel and my sons who live in Israel, and to make sure that they will not be annihilated, as many are saying. But I think it was very interesting to hear that said like this. It's an existential issue. We're afraid of being annihilated. And we see militants on the other side that want to annihilate us. We have to defend ourselves against that.
I don't really see how it's feasible for any reasonable person to think that Hamas has the capability of destroying Israel. Hamas can kill people, that's true. Hamas can kidnap people, that's true. But Hamas does not amount to an existential threat for the state of Israel. Now, the Soviet Union was an existential threat for the United States, and vice versa. Iran is an existential threat for Israel, and there's no doubt about that. But Hamas certainly isn't.
100 hostages are still in the tunnels in Gaza. Men, women, and children. That, in my mind, is family. That is a threat. Now, the state of Israel will not be destroyed, but let me make this clear. Iran has made it clear that we should be wiped off the map and is putting together a nuclear problem to do that. One nuclear facility in downtown Tel Aviv would destroy the state of Israel. So yes, Israel does feel that the threat, the Ring of Fire, the way that it is being narrated, and what the heads of Hamas said, Israel should be destroyed. We don't want a two-state solution because that will make us recognize a state of Israel next to our state. Israelis see that and actually are worried about that, which is why I want to stress the fact that Israel went to war on the 8th of October, not Benjamin Netanyahu. I'm a reservist. I did 30 years a year in the reserves. I don't go to war for political reasons in Israel. It doesn't work like that. The Israeli military is not a professional military like you have in the United States. It is people like me who leave their desk and their mouse and their Adobe Photoshop and get on a tank and go to defend the country. Nobody in Israel would do that to keep Bibi in power.
That's not exactly what I was saying. I
Okay.
wasn't saying to keep Bibi. Bibi was the one who decided on the strategy and the tactics for this war. And basically, he did this for a specific reason, and that reason was to stay out of jail.
Do you think that if Bennett was in power, he would not have done the same thing?
I think that he would have defended Israel, but I don't think that,
I
for
think
example,
anybody else would have had gotten the hostages released by now if they had accepted the ceasefire back in July or even before then. Bibi did not want these hostages. He wanted war. He wanted decimation of Gaza, and there's going to be a reoccupation of Gaza now. And it's not sustainable. And again, as an American, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I as an American, cannot be complicit in these kinds of war crimes committed against the Palestinians, or any people for that matter. And while there's the concern on the Israeli side of this existential threat, the actual destruction is happening on the Palestinians right now.
We did not start this.
We can debate that as well, but the idea that political Zionism came from Europe and imposed itself on Palestine, displaced Palestinians.
How many Israelis are Europeans?
Well, the ones who began political Zionism were all Europeans.
How many Israelis today are
I
Europeans?
think we're getting off track here. I think
They're
this-
all- they're
If
the
we
ones who are
also-
leading.
Yeah, we will also
And
we
so-
need to take a break. So we need to take a break to, to check our equipment and take some water. And
Wonderful.
we'll be right back. Hold your thoughts. We'll be right back. All right, thank you, and we are back. Let's wrap it up our discussion. Let's pick it up from the point that we are just raising before our break. David, you were born in U.S. and grew up, and this question actually connected with what we were talking about before the break. You were born in U.S. and grew up in Israel. Let me ask you this. The Palestine Liberation Organization claims sovereignty over internationally recognized territories, such as the West Bank, including Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. Pollock, a former CIA analyst, argues that the majority of Palestinians want to reclaim all of the historic Palestine, including pre-1967 Israel. Your thoughts, and then you can wrap it up with the previous discussion as well.
Like everything else, it's not a black and white. The Jews are not black and white. There are those who want a restoration of Greater Israel, and there are those who want a dual national or binational unification of the state. And we're most of us on some kind of spectrum in between. Palestinians that I have spoken to, both inside Israel, in the West Bank, and in other places, are also somewhere on some kind of spectrum. Some would want to see the elimination of the state of Israel completely. Some would allow some kind of two-state solution, and some would like to be a part of this. I would say something like this. I don't think that there is a magic solution to any of this. And one of the things that, as an Israeli, and again, I've sat in this situation in many places, is okay, we're here. There's a question about the narrative. There's terms that were used here that I would probably not agree with. I've been in Gaza and I've never killed a civilian, and I haven't seen that done on the way like this. I would not agree with genocide. I would not agree with ethnic cleansing. I mean, I've been there. I've seen what's going on. That would not be something I could. But again, it doesn't matter what I think, because there are enough people who think that way. So we have to deal with it. And what I would like, and maybe this is a possibility here in this kind of forum, this is where we are. This is what we are. This is the situation. What viable future is there from the place that we are right now? And I have two very esteemed colleagues that are on the other side of the political fence, and because I am afraid of living in my echo chamber, I would like to know if there is some kind of way to put something that both sides can actually strive for.
Great. Thank you. Thank you
It's
so
been
much
done.
for.
It's called the Clinton parameters.
But it's never worked.
Well, frankly, from my point of view, it hasn't worked because the Israelis don't want it. And because the ruling coalitions in Israel are dependent upon settlers, and they're dependent upon people who are opposed to a two-state solution. And so what we end up with is we end up by walking away or imposing new criteria. For example, the ceasefire that was being negotiated all of a sudden became an issue of the ceasefire to have the strip of land between Gaza and Egypt, that would be permanently occupied by Israeli forces. Okay, that was imposed in order to, by the Israeli side, in order to sabotage the ceasefire negotiations.
I don't agree with that. I've been there. I've been on the Philadelphia corridor. I've driven down it. I've driven up it. I know exactly what's happening on both sides. I don't think that was imposed for political reasons. It was imposed for military reasons.
It could have been imposed for military reasons, but it was imposed at a point in which there had already been negotiations taking place, and all of a sudden this became an issue that had never been raised before, was put in. This is what happens.
Maybe lieutenant when we raised that issue.
During the ceasefire negotiations that have recently been taking place.
It's been raised again and again over the years. Philadelphia corridor is a major issue. And I remember sitting in intelligence briefings.
This is the thing that's been going on every time there's negotiations that take place. For example, all of a sudden it became necessary that Jonathan Pollard be freed by the Americans. All of a sudden it became necessary that the question of payments by the PLO to people who are incarcerated in Israel, that those payments have to stop beforehand. And those payments have been going on, by the way, since 1964. All of a sudden it became an issue that has to be addressed. The issue of the Jews who were expelled from Arab countries became an issue as well, in negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis. So frankly, it becomes fairly apparent that every time there appears to be a possible solution on the horizon, that it's the Israelis who are throwing up roadblocks.
Sharm el-Sheikh, 2015.
Okay, I also want to say, I've sat in the White House, I've sat in the State Department, I've sat in the Congress, and there's corruption.
Agreed.
There's no decisions being made based on what's right, not even based on what's in the best interests of the United States, nor of the interests of the Israelis or of the Palestinians or of the region. It is about money, it's about power, and it's about suppressing any opposition. That's part of the problem. It's not the problem. If we are listening to two different narratives that are coexisting on this stage, why can't we have coexisting narratives in Washington, D.C.? We can't. One side, the Palestinian narrative, is defamed, is demonized. Professor Gelvin can attest to what's happening at UCLA now, a security apparatus that is monitoring students' activities and speech. So this idea of the First Amendment is being thrown out the window. Now there's a threat of taking away our 501c3 charitable tax status, even though you have foreign Israeli organizations supporting a foreign government who are working throughout Washington, D.C., bragging about how much they control these politicians. That's part of the problem, is the corruption in
And
Washington
also-
that has to be stopped. And
And also-
it starts on our campuses by freeing these students who have been very peaceful. I attended these encampments. They're very peaceful. They just wanted to issue their stand, and then they get attacked at UCLA by Israelis one night. The police stood by and did nothing, and then the next night the police come in and forcibly take out their encampments and assault these students.
They have another narrative about
Well, I
this.
mean,
another
that's
account of
the
the
American
fact.
narrative, is what I'm saying.
Okay,
It's
well,
been
you
that
have
way
the right to say it.
for decades. My friend Alex Ode was killed by a Jewish Defense League bomb. Our office, there was a bomb plot in 2001 that the FBI foiled against our office in 2000. So if there's been violence in America, it's always been against our community,
Okay.
yet we're the ones that are demonized and dehumanized when we bring up the
that
Palestinian
goes with the
issue.
next question, Salam, which is for you. It has been argued that terrorists are always Muslim, never white. According to the Pentagon Air Power Summary, the U.S. and allied forces have dropped close to 400,000 bombs and missiles with an average of 46 strikes per day since 2007. In your opinion, is the U.S. a terrorist state or a country of freedom fighters?
The United States?
Yeah.
Of course it's supporting terrorism when it bombs civilian targets to achieve political purposes, or military goals for that matter. That's terrorism. That's what we accuse Iran of doing. And
Hamas is terrorists.
Hamas is on the terrorist list. Okay. As Professor Gelvin said, it's not an existential threat to anyone right now, right? But when a superpower supports another state in attacking civilians for political and military goals, that by definition is terrorism. Yet the United States government singles out Muslims as the only one with an extremist and militant problem. Not Jewish militants, not Hindu militants, not white supremacists. They're not on the list. So of course Muslims are singled out, and that's part of the problem. That's the corruption in Washington that we're facing today.
So what
David.
about the anti-Semitism?
Well, let's deal with it.
That will be the next question
What
for
does
you.
that have to do with whether the
Right.
United States is
David, that will
supporting
be
terrorism or
the
not?
next question for you. Noam Chomsky argues that, quote, no state demands a right to exist. That's by Noam Chomsky. End quote. For the record, does the state of Israel have the right to exist and defend itself?
Definitely yes, just like any nation, any nationality has a right to exist. And I would even say more than a right to defend itself, I think it has an obligation to defend its civilians. I mean, that is the basic duty of any government, of any power.
And
I
now
would
for
answer it in a slightly different way, which is that no, Israel does not have a right to exist. The United States doesn't have a right to exist. No state has a right to exist. The United States was built on slavery. The United States was built on the destruction of an indigenous population. So where do we get this abstract notion of a right from? Israel exists, period. Okay, it's a member of the United Nations in the same way that many other nations are members of the United Nations. So therefore, it is, if it abides by this international law and international state system, it's there. It's simply there. And sort of like this idea of a right to exist is only brought up in the question of Israel.
Yeah, the same for the right to defend itself. Everybody has the right to defend themselves, but you don't have a right to go and annihilate a whole population and invoke this notion of self-defense. It's you know, if that's the case, then Iran has the right to do what it's doing. Definitely, the Lebanese have a right to do what they're doing, and the Palestinians have a right to resist the occupation. So we're only looking at the right of self-defense from one side, which again is the usual United States government narrative. It denies Palestinian rights, it denies Palestinian existence, it denies Palestinian life, and I think that's part of the problem.
I would like to ask, does the Palestinian population agree with the two-state solution?
Yes, of course they do. I mean,
I have
like
not
you said,
seen evidence of that.
come on,
anywhere.
Barghouti talks about it all the time. You know, I mean, you may talk to certain people. Do you talk to Palestinian Christians?
Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
what do they think?
Some of them do believe that Israel should not exist, and some believe that we should find a two-state
Okay,
solution.
so you're going to find the
I've
spectrum.
heard both of the spectrum,
Yeah.
but
But we're not hearing.
okay. But here's the thing: I want to agree with something that both of us are saying. The corruption the militants, the activists have actually hijacked the dynamic and the initiative on both sides. Let's make this very clear. I have not heard one, okay, let's go the other way. I would agree that Israel's made a lot of mistakes. I would agree that the Jewish people have made a lot of mistakes. I would agree that we have done things wrong in many different cases. I have not heard a word of condemnation from inside the Arab-Palestinian narrative that says they made some mistakes along the way. No sense of responsibility.
You obviously are not in the
I'll
wrong
just-
circles.
I'll just-
But anyway,
Okay,
I'm
so
just
I
saying,
would
I'll just
love
go-
to
I'm just
sit down-
saying,
I'd like
at
to-
this point, you know, when you're targeting and defaming powerless people and saying they're part of the problem while you're decimating them, that's a problem in and of itself. That's what Israel is doing, and the more it fears this existential threat, the more it goes and bombs. It's now bombing Syria.
2-year-old
and taking
Bibas
more-
doesn't call them powerless.
They're powerless. Come on.
I just
They're
I
nothing
just would
compared
like
to Israel
bring-
is now one of the most, one of the strongest military forces in the world.
I-
The United States is the superpower.
So
And now
let's-
you're going
What do you
against
believe
defenseless
Israel should do
populations.
now?
Go
What
to
do
the
you-
table. Go to the table
So-
and say we
And
have to
say
negotiate.
what?
I mean, at some point, people will get tired of killing.
Agreed.
And they will call for a ceasefire. We should have called for a ceasefire as a country
Agreed.
a long time ago, and go to the table
And say
and work
what?
it out. That's the only way. It's the only way to do it
Let's
right
talk about President Trump now, because I think it's a very opportune moment. American Jews massively favor Trump, and that's for David or for anyone who, but let me, just for the record again, American Jews massively favor President Trump. But let me remind you that in his inaugural speech in 1961, President John Kennedy said this, quote, "Those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of a tiger ended up inside of the tiger," end quote. Do you think that there is a risk that American Jews may end up inside of the tiger, sort of speak?
I'm not sure American Jewry supported
Yeah,
Trump.
where did that come from?
That's empirically, just talking to people, hearing from
More-
people. It's just
I
there's
think
a
the
consensus
numbers
out
are
there.
way above 65% supported Harris, American, if I'm not correct. If I'm correct.
So if it is Harris, then it is still American.
Well, again, and here,
America, like they say, I'm sorry, have no friends but interests. So let's change the rhetoric here. So not the tiger, but interests.
But
Well,
I
I
would-
mean, Trump did take $100 million from Mary Edelson, and I think and she is all for annexation, and I think that's a big concern. I don't see any end in sight in terms of the genocide, the war crimes committed against the Palestinian people. And Benjamin Netanyahu, now there's an arrest warrant out on him by the International Criminal Court. So I think people have to come to their senses. Just stop killing. I mean, just yesterday I read another LA Times article. 25 more Gazans were killed? Like, how much more killing are we going to allow to take place? And then we're still getting into this theory about the right of existence and right of self-defense and all this abstract, when on the ground, you talk so much about what's happening on the ground, more and more Palestinians are
give the
being
hostages
killed.
back, no more Palestinians will die.
No, that's not.
That probably wouldn't happen anyway.
That doesn't work that way. You know that. Come on.
It's not going to end the
You
war.
know, and Netanyahu could have gotten the hostages back in July by agreeing to the ceasefire terms that the United States was supporting, that Qatar and Egypt worked very hard to get from Hamas. And he
Hamas
rejected it.
was
He wanted to
trying
continue.
reach on a ceasefire, and Israel
Whatever,
said no.
Netanyahu wanted to continue. Israeli society supported him.
Netanyahu cannot
that's-
send the 401st Brigade into Gaza for political reasons. That is not possible. I am a commander in the 401st Brigade that is in Gaza now. Israel politics do not work like that.
Okay.
It is a reserve
Then
army.
we as Americans should stop supporting it. As Americans, I don't want to have anything to do with this genocide or this ethnic
I don't
cleansing.
agree with genocide, and I don't
It
agree with
is
ethnic
genocide.
and cleansing.
Everybody sees it as
Oh,
I
genocide.
have been there, you have not.
The whole world sees it as genocide.
Okay.
Sometimes
So-
when you're
But
inside, you don't see
I
So
want
we
to
are
get off
you don't
this,
see
and I
this.
want to say this.
I
We
would just
will
have
not
three
agree.
last
What is the
questions.
future?
3 last questions. 1 question about anthropology and 2 others. What to expect from President Trump's Middle East policy?
Trump based his policy in his first term on 4 things. Number one, his love of strong men, and Netanyahu, of course, fits that bill. Number two, his desire to get reelected again. Number three, reversing anything that Barack Obama did. And number four, God, I forgot number four. Anyway, these are the foundations for his policy. And the thing is that things have shifted, things have changed since the first term. So at this point, what he's done is he's appointed very, very pro-right-wing Israeli people to ambassadorship, for example, to the Middle East oversight of the peace process, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, he has no need to get reelected again. He has no need to suck up to Benjamin Netanyahu.
Exactly.
So it could go one way or the other. I mean, basically, there is the America First idea that people around him are going to be pushing very, very strongly for in terms of Israel-Palestine. He himself is probably going to go one way or the other based upon the last advice that he gets.
Okay. So, and this is the outside, that's the second question, one more.
Well,
And, yeah.
I think also you have to
Yes.
look at who he's appointed. Huckabee is now, ambassador?
Is, yeah,
He wants to be
American ambassador to
Israel.
Israel.
Rubio is State Department. These guys are Zionists. They're Christian Zionists, if you want to categorize them that way.
Mhm.
So it's just more of the same, if not even further to the extreme
Mhm.
of looking at the region as part of this master plan, which I don't understand, but people have the right of that narrative of Christian Zionism, that they want Armageddon to happen so that Jesus can come back, which a number of evangelicals believe, so that they can either kill half the Jews and convert the other half.
Mhm.
This, aside from discussing the content of Christian Zionism, our country has departed from separation of church and state. We should never allow any religious narrative. Doesn't matter. I have a religious narrative. Dave has a religious narrative. Anybody can have a religious narrative. That's okay. And I can disagree. I can be offended. Whatever. It should not be a part of United States foreign policy or domestic policy, for that matter. And that is the real threat right now. Is we're moving away from separation of church and state. We are compromising First Amendment rights of people now. We are threatening non-governmental organizations to shut them down, freeze their assets if they don't follow this policy. And we're playing both ways in terms of counterterrorism.
Mhm. David, do you have any remarks about
Well,
what to expect from
I
Trump's
think the American
presidency?
people elected President Trump to put America first, and I think Trump had showed in his first time as president that is what he does. He uses different ways to achieve it. Some of them are unconventional and different from this, but I think supporting Israel is an American policy and should be a part of Americans' foreign policy for American reasons as much as it is for Israelis. Again, I think part of what President Trump ran on was his support for Israel. He was very clear about it. His first candidacy, his first time in office actually proves that. And I think that added on at least 2 or 3 votes in some of the swing states at some point. I think he is doing what he was put in place to do.
Okay. Now, this is an outside, 2 more questions, and you may have one question from the audience, but one of the last questions to all of you. And that is really outside of the box, not politics. It's really from anthropological perspective, human being perspective, biological anthropology.
I'm not an
Anthropological.
anthropologist.
Yeah, but
There's
you
one
know.
disclaimer already.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So, but anyhow, it is an interesting question. If you don't want to answer, we just don't have to. But
Okay.
I will just present it to the panel. According to biological anthropologist Richard Rangan, he's a Harvard professor and a researcher in biological anthropology. He studied male chimpanzees, really outside of the box question.
We're going
Male
well.
chimpanzees
I think-
have
Is that
rates.
considered an improvement?
No, I'm just going to finish the question, so
Okay.
you may have the right to decline, but let me finish the
Okay.
question. Male chimpanzees, that's what he studies, and he discovered, he has done this for a long time, that the rates of aggression between the chimpanzees are 2 and 3 orders of magnitude higher than human males. And still, it is also well documented that human males exhibit high levels of aggression compared to other primates. Do you think, all of you, that matriarchal societies, we never had one, but the closest we had were the American Indians, the Iroquois. Do you think that matriarchal societies, if we ever have to have one of these, not necessarily with a president female, but the whole society having those the paradigm shift,
I'll let these two men answer that question.
may come to achieve a great peacefulness someday than male-dominated societies? Just a general.
Professor, you start on that.
No, I'm not going to start on that.
I don't think we're qualified to answer that.
Okay. No
Okay.
matriarch.
I will have.
I mean, yeah. Should we have more women in leadership? Absolutely, yes. And not because expecting less aggression.
I
But
think Margaret Thatcher
just-
alone disproves
yeah,
that.
I was just gonna say Margaret Thatcher may have shifted the curve on that one.
Golda Meir.
Golda Meir is another one.
Dear
So.
Gandhi.
Dear Gandhi. So yeah,
We've
so
got
I
some
mean,
of those.
but in terms of having more women represented in government, in policy making, and decision making, and world leadership, absolutely. And there are great women leaders, and especially for Muslims. I think the patriarchal imposition on religion has really created many problems and many crimes against women in the name of religion. So do we need to have more representation of women in public affairs? Absolutely, yes.
Any other? Okay, and the last question is for the three of you. Is Israel carrying out genocide, ethnic cleansing in Gaza? Professor
I think
Gelvin.
you already know the answer to that.
Yeah, we covered, but for
But maybe,
to-
Genocide is a legal question, okay? Are they doing an extraordinary amount of killing that's not necessary? Yes, they are, okay? Whether that fits the legal definition of genocide is something that international lawyers have to handle. But the fact is that, what they're doing is 44,000 people are dead, in Gaza right now.
140.
44.
44, as far as I've heard.
Okay, I'm all right.
And, more than 3,000 in Lebanon and so on and so forth. I mean, none of this was necessary. So basically, whether it's genocide or not, the effect is the same thing.
David?
Again, been there. I know what's going on inside. By legal definition, for sure, you cannot call it genocide. And the question would be, is Israel doing more than it needs to do in targeting civilian population? I know the rules of engagement. I know the decision-making process before somebody pulls the trigger. I've been on both sides of that process, and I don't believe. I mean, there is a justification, and this is a war that was not thrust on us. And I think that was also part of it. So, and no, before I forget, no, it's not a punishment. I just know how it's happening. Nobody wants for civilians to die.
Israeli
So-
leaders have been quoted several times in terms of their desire to see full destruction of Palestinian society, of Gaza in particular, of starving people. There have been killing of humanitarian aid workers. There's a destruction of infrastructure. Disease is running rampant. So it's not just about the numbers. It's about these targeted attacks on civilian populations. The International Court of Justice has called it plausible genocide. And if we care about international law that we have touted all these years, well then let's take it to the court. And let's have the full discussion and the final decision in a court of law. And now there's a warrant out for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. So the evidence is mounting against the Israeli side that, oh, we're not doing anything, we're doing everything perfectly within, we're the most moral army in the world. It's becoming empty rhetoric. It's almost laughable if it not for the devastation and the human suffering that it has caused.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for this great discussion. I think that's really, very,
Thank you.
very.
It has been
Thank you.
amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shut up and sit down.